Nobody announces the beginning of a slow failure. There's no meeting where someone stands up and says, "Starting today, this organization is going to begin the process of becoming less than it was." There's no memo. There's no moment visible enough to point to afterward and say, "That was when it started." The slow failures, the ones that take 5 years, 10 years, a decade, begin in the space between ordinary decisions that nobody flags and ordinary results that nobody questions hard enough. The experience of being inside one is specific, and it's almost never described honestly. What gets described in the post-mortem is the strategic error. The wrong market bet, the failed product, the leadership transition that went badly. These are real and they're part of the story, but they're not what it felt like from the inside during the years before the ending became obvious. This episode is not about a single company. It's about the pattern, the consistent cross-industry, cross-decade pattern of what slow organizational failure feels like from inside it, drawn from the accounts of people who were there, and from the research on organizational decline that documents what the experience actually looks like before the diagnosis is available. Because most people who have worked in a failing organization didn't know they were in one until well into the process, and the things that told them, in retrospect, that something was wrong, those signals were present much earlier than they recognized them at the time. Understanding what those signals look like is the only way to recognize them in real time rather than in retrospect. The first signal is almost always a change in how information moves. In healthy organizations, bad news travels upward. The people who know something is wrong have a mechanism, formal or informal, to surface that information to the people who have the authority to address it. This isn't always comfortable, and it's often imperfect. But it functions, problems get identified, the organization responds. In organizations beginning a slow decline, the information flow changes before anything else does. Bad news stops traveling upward with the same reliability. Not because the bad news stops, it rarely does, but because the environment in which it would be delivered has changed in ways that make the delivery feel risky. This is not always the product of explicit suppression. It's more often the product of accumulated experience. People learn through small incidents rather than large ones that delivering bad news produces a response that is more uncomfortable than the problem itself. The messenger becomes associated with the message. The problem gets managed rather than addressed. The person who raised it is subtly disadvantaged in a subsequent resource allocation. None of these experiences need to be dramatic to be effective. A single case where the person who raised a concern found themselves on the wrong side of a decision afterward is enough to teach the lesson to everyone who witnessed it. Organizations learn what to communicate upward through exactly this mechanism, and the learning is rapid. Jim Collins, in his research on organizational decline, identified what he called the decline of a learning culture as one of the earliest predictors of institutional failure. Not a collapse in learning, not a sudden change, a decline. A gradual reduction in the quality and frequency of honest internal assessment, driven by accumulated experience of what happens to the people who provide it. Have you ever been in an organization where the incentive structure around delivering bad news had changed enough to notice? You don't have to name the company. I just want to know whether the change was gradual or sudden. Leave a comment. The second signal is a change in how decisions get made, specifically who is in the room when they happen. In the early stages of organizational decline, the decision-making circle tends to narrow. A leadership team that previously made decisions through a process of genuine deliberation begins to make decisions through a smaller group or through informal channels that bypass the deliberation process. The formal structure remains, the meetings still happen, the committees still convene, but the decisions have been made before the formal process begins. This pattern is recognizable in retrospect in nearly every major corporate collapse. The Nokia board's decision-making in 2010 and 2011 was described by people who were inside it as increasingly concentrated in a small group around ELOP, with the broader leadership team receiving decisions rather than participating in making them. The Sears Holdings board under Lampert had multiple directors who raised concerns in the record that were noted and not acted upon. Theranos's internal governance structure was designed functionally to prevent the kind of deliberation that would have surfaced the technology's limitations. The narrowing of the decision-making circle is dangerous for a specific reason that goes beyond the obvious problem of excluding relevant information. It changes the organization's relationship to dissent. In an organization where decisions are made through genuine deliberation, dissent is a functional input. In an organization where decisions are pre-made and the formal process is documentation, dissent is friction. The organization learns to suppress it, and then it loses the capacity to generate it. And then it has no mechanism to catch the error that the dissent would have caught. If this kind of organizational pattern recognition, the mechanics of how institutions fail before they fail visibly, is what makes this channel worth your time, the like is the direct signal. The third signal is the most personal and the most difficult to act on in real time. It is the moment when people stop talking at work about what they actually think about the work. In healthy organizations, there is a level of ambient honesty about how things are going. Not every conversation is a performance review, but there is a texture to the professional conversation that reflects genuine assessment. People talk about what's working and what isn't. They surface frustrations and celebrate real wins. The organizational temperature is readable from informal conversation. In organizations in the middle of a slow decline, this texture changes. The informal conversation becomes more careful. People assess their audience before saying what they think. Certain topics become implicitly off-limits, not because anyone has prohibited them, but because everyone has noticed that raising them produces a particular kind of social discomfort. The researchers who have studied this phenomenon call it organizational silence, the accumulation of individually reasonable decisions not to say something that, in aggregate, deprives the organization of the honest assessment it needs to function. Former employees of companies that subsequently failed describe this experience with remarkable consistency across industries and decades. The GE employees who watched the conglomerate's financial complexity exceed its management capacity describe a specific moment when the ambient organizational conversation became something other than what it had been. The Enron employees who were not inside the specific decision-making circles described noticing that their honest assessment of the organization's direction was no longer welcome in the way it had previously been. The individual experience is not of suppression. It's of gradual, almost imperceptible change, the kind of change that is only visible in retrospect, compared against the memory of what the organization felt like before it started. What failing quietly looks like from the inside is, most of the time, exactly like normal working life, with a specific set of small differences that only become significant when you aggregate them. The meetings that feel slightly less productive than they used to. The decision that was clearly made before the discussion that was supposed to make it. The concern that was raised and acknowledged and then never referenced again. The person who left and whose departure was explained in a way that seemed incomplete. The result that was described as a success in the quarterly review and that everyone in the room knew was not quite that. None of these are catastrophic. Each is explainable. The explanation for each one, taken individually, is usually accurate. It is only the pattern, the accumulation of individually explained moments, that tells the story that the individual explanations obscure. The practical thing. Once a quarter or once a month, if the organization is changing rapidly, ask yourself 3 questions. Is bad news reaching the people who need it with the same reliability it used to? Is the decision-making circle expanding or contracting? Has the ambient honesty of informal professional conversation changed? The first time you honestly answer no, yes, and yes to those 3 questions is the moment when the information is most useful, because it's the moment before the decline becomes visible in the metrics. By the time it's visible in the metrics, the questions are no longer questions. The next episode looks at a case where all 3 signals were present, the metrics had not yet confirmed them, and the decision that would have changed the outcome was made, just not in the direction the signals were pointing. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical stoicism.